Imagine a summer without sunshine, where biting frost blankets the land in June and snow falls in July. The warmth and vibrancy typically associated with the season are replaced by an eerie cold and a stark, barren landscape. The usual sounds of summer, children playing, birds singing, are conspicuously absent, replaced by an unsettling silence. This chilling scenario wasn't a scene from a dystopian novel, but a stark reality for the inhabitants of Earth in 1816, the year infamously known as the Year Without a Summer. The world was plunged into a state of confusion and despair as the usual rhythms of life were disrupted. Crops failed, leading to widespread food shortages and economic turmoil. Communities that relied on agriculture faced unprecedented challenges. The culprit, a volcanic eruption of unprecedented scale, a catastrophic event that shook the world and left an indelible mark on history. Mount Tambora, located in present-day Indonesia, erupted in April 1815, spewing vast amounts of volcanic ash and sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere. This massive eruption was one of the most powerful in recorded history, and its effects were felt globally. The summer of 1816 was one of unprecedented darkness and despair. The volcanic ash spread across the globe, creating a veil that blocked sunlight and altered weather patterns. The resulting climatic anomalies led to a series of unfortunate events that compounded the misery of the time. A perpetual grey sky cast a gloomy pall over the northern hemisphere. The sun, which usually brought warmth and life, was obscured by the thick clouds of ash. This lack of sunlight had a profound impact on the environment and the people who depended on it. The sun, typically a beacon of warmth and life, remained strangely dimmed, its rays unable to pierce the thick veil of volcanic ash that choked the atmosphere. This dimming of the sun led to a significant drop in temperatures, creating an unseasonal chill that gripped the land. Temperatures plummeted, creating an unseasonal chill that gripped the land. People found themselves wearing coats and bundling up as if it were winter, even though the calendar said it was summer. The cold was relentless, and it affected every aspect of daily life. The world watched in astonishment and fear as summer refused to bloom. The usual signs of the season, blooming flowers, lush green fields, were nowhere to be seen. Instead, the landscape was dominated by frost and snow, creating a surreal and unsettling atmosphere. Instead of vibrant greens and blossoming flowers, a persistent frost painted the landscape a desolate white and brown. Crops that should have been thriving were stunted or destroyed, leading to food shortages and economic hardship. The impact on agriculture was devastating, and the ripple effects were felt far and wide. It was a summer that felt more like winter, a stark and chilling aberration that left a lasting impact on the memories of those who lived through it. The Year Without a Summer was a time of hardship and struggle, but it also demonstrated the resilience and adaptability of the human spirit. People found ways to cope with the unexpected challenges, and their stories of perseverance continue to inspire us today. The catalyst for this global climatic anomaly lay dormant on the distant island of Sumbawa in the Dutch East Indies, now Indonesia. There, Mount Tambora, a seemingly unremarkable volcano, stirred from its slumber. On April 10, 1815, it erupted with a cataclysmic force that dwarfed any volcanic eruption in recorded history. The eruption of Mount Tambora was a spectacle of unimaginable fury. With a deafening roar that echoed across the archipelago, the volcano unleashed a towering column of ash and molten rock high into the atmosphere, reaching altitudes exceeding 25 miles. The sky turned pitch black as billions of tons of volcanic debris were ejected, blanketing the surrounding islands in darkness. The immediate impact was devastating. Pyroclastic flows, superheated avalanches of gas and volcanic matter raced down the slopes of Tambora, incinerating everything in their path. Tsunamis, triggered by the volcano's violent convulsions, lashed the shores of neighboring islands, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The death toll from the eruption and its immediate aftermath reached over 70,000, marking it one of the deadliest volcanic disasters in history. But the true horror of Tambora's eruption lay not just in its immediate devastation, but in its long-term global consequences. The eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815 was one of the most powerful in recorded history, and its immediate impact was catastrophic. Entire villages were buried under volcanic ash, and tens of thousands of lives were lost. However, the true scale of the disaster extended far beyond the immediate vicinity of the volcano. The sheer volume of sulfur dioxide gas ejected into the stratosphere had a catastrophic effect on the planet's climate, triggering a phenomenon known as a volcanic winter. This massive release of gas and ash into the atmosphere created a veil that encircled the globe, altering weather patterns and disrupting the natural balance of the Earth's climate system. High above the Earth's surface, the sulfur dioxide transformed into a haze of sulfate aerosols. These tiny particles spread across the globe, forming a layer that lingered in the stratosphere for years. This haze was not just a local phenomenon. It had far-reaching effects that were felt across continents. This volcanic smog acted like a giant planetary sunshade, reflecting sunlight back into space and preventing the sun's warmth from reaching the Earth's surface. The reduction in sunlight led to a cooling effect, which had profound implications for the global climate. The Earth's energy balance was disrupted, leading to a cascade of climatic changes. This resulted in a significant drop in global temperatures, plunging the Northern Hemisphere into an extended period of cold and darkness. The year following the eruption, 1816, became known as the Year Without a Summer. The drop in temperatures was not just a minor inconvenience, it had severe consequences for agriculture, ecosystems, and human societies. The effects were felt most acutely in the months following the eruption. The summer of 1816 was marked by persistent cold, unseasonable frosts, and heavy rains. These weather anomalies led to widespread crop failures as farmers were unable to grow the food needed to sustain their communities. The summer of 1816 witnessed a series of climatic anomalies that baffled and terrified people worldwide. Newspapers of the time were filled with reports of strange weather patterns, and people struggled to understand the cause of these unprecedented changes. The lack of scientific knowledge about volcanic eruptions and their impact on the climate added to the fear and confusion. Frost and snow in June and July devastated crops across Europe and North America. Farmers watched in despair as their fields, which should have been lush and green, were instead covered in frost and snow. The loss of crops led to food shortages and increased prices, exacerbating the suffering of already struggling communities. Lakes and rivers froze over at unusual times, and glaciers advanced further down mountain valleys. These unusual freezing events disrupted transportation and trade, further compounding the economic difficulties faced by many regions. The advancing glaciers were a stark reminder of the power of nature and the fragility of human societies in the face of such overwhelming forces. The world, still recovering from the Napoleonic Wars, found itself grappling with a new and invisible enemy, a global climate crisis. The combination of war and climate disaster created a perfect storm of hardship and suffering. People were forced to adapt to a rapidly changing world, and the lessons learned from this period continue to resonate today as we face our own climate challenges. The most immediate and devastating consequence of the Year Without a Summer was widespread crop failure. This catastrophic event, triggered by a series of volcanic eruptions, notably Mount Tambora in 1815, led to a significant drop in global temperatures. The resulting climatic anomalies wreaked havoc on agriculture, leaving fields barren and farmers desperate. The unseasonal frost and lack of sunlight decimated agricultural production across the Northern Hemisphere. Crops that had been planted with the expectation of a normal growing season were suddenly exposed to freezing temperatures and persistent cloud cover, which stunted their growth and led to widespread failure. Fields of wheat, barley and oats, the staple foods of millions, withered and died. These grains, which formed the backbone of diets in many regions, were particularly vulnerable to the cold and lack of sunlight. Farmers watched helplessly as their livelihoods and communities' food supplies were decimated. Fruit trees failed to blossom and vegetable gardens lay barren. The cold snap and lack of sunlight meant that even the hardiest of plants struggled to survive. Orchards that should have been heavy with fruit were instead empty, and vegetable patches that should have provided sustenance were left desolate. The agricultural collapse led to a catastrophic food shortage across Europe, North America, and parts of Asia. Rural villages, which relied heavily on local produce, were hit the hardest. Markets that once bustled with activity and fresh produce became eerily quiet, with empty stalls and desperate faces. Grain prices skyrocketed, making bread, the cornerstone of the diet for the majority of the population, an unaffordable luxury for many. The scarcity of staple foods led to inflation, and even those who had money found it difficult to purchase enough to feed their families. Bread, once a daily staple, became a rare and precious commodity. Famine stalked the land, leading to widespread malnutrition, disease and death, particularly among the poorest and most vulnerable. Families were torn apart by hunger, and children in particular suffered the most. Makeshift clinics sprang up to deal with the influx of malnourished and sick individuals, but resources were scarce. The widespread hunger and desperation led to social unrest, riots and looting as people resorted to desperate measures to feed themselves and their families. Bread riots became a common occurrence, with crowds storming bakeries and food stores in search of sustenance. The social fabric of many communities began to unravel as the struggle for survival intensified. Governments struggled to cope with the scale of the crisis, their resources already stretched thin by years of war and economic instability. Leaders held crisis meetings trying to find solutions to the growing unrest and food shortages. However, the sheer scale of the disaster made it difficult to provide effective relief. The year without a summer, with its empty granaries and rumbling stomachs, served as a stark reminder of humanity's precarious reliance on the delicate balance of nature. It highlighted the vulnerability of our food systems and the far-reaching impacts of climatic disruptions. The lessons learned from this period underscore the importance of resilience and preparedness in the face of environmental challenges.